I can't tell him that. I can't tell him.
You have to.
I can't. He's never gonna forgive this. How is he gonna forgive that?
She called me a liar. She called me a scammer. But she's there.
Sirens in the night, flashing lights, and two men in handcuffs, Daniel and his uncle, faces pale, eyes darting, as police lead them away. Lisa stands frozen, her phone slipping from her hand, the world she thought she knew collapsing in a single, brutal instant. This isn't a breakup. This is a bombshell. 1 minute, she's planning a wedding. The next, she's watching the man she loved get shoved into the back of a police car. The shock is so raw, it almost feels unreal, like a scene from a movie she never auditioned for. But this is real life, and the fallout is about to hit everyone, hard. Daniel's confusion is written all over his face. He's shouting, pleading, insisting there's been a mistake, but the officers don't even blink. His uncle, usually the calm, wise elder, now looks rattled, sweat beading on his forehead. Lisa's heart is pounding so loud she can barely hear the chaos around her. She's replaying every conversation, every promise, every late-night confession, searching for the moment when everything started to go wrong. Fans online are losing their minds. Social media explodes with rumors, wild theories, and frantic questions. Was Daniel a scammer all along? Did Lisa fall for the oldest trick in the book? Or is this some twisted misunderstanding that spiraled out of control? Nobody knows, but everyone wants answers. It's hard to believe that just a few weeks ago, Lisa and Daniel were the couple everyone rooted for. Their story had all the makings of a fairy tale, two people from different worlds, brought together by fate and a reality TV camera crew. Lisa, with her big laugh and even bigger heart, seemed to have finally found her match in Daniel, whose charm and devotion melted hearts across continents. Their video calls were filled with inside jokes, whispered dreams, and promises of forever. Fans watched as Lisa packed her bags, left her comfort zone, and flew halfway across the world to meet the man she believed was her soulmate. The chemistry was undeniable, the connection electric. Even Daniel's family, especially his uncle, welcomed Lisa with open arms, making her feel like she belonged. But now, standing on the edge of this disaster, Lisa can't help but wonder if she missed the warning signs. Were those loving glances genuine or rehearsed? Did Daniel's uncle really see her as family or as an opportunity? The cracks in the fairy tale start to show. There were moments, tiny, almost invisible at the time, when things felt off. A strange look between Daniel and his uncle during a family dinner. A conversation about money that ended a little too quickly. A promise that sounded more like a sales pitch than a vow. Lisa brushed them off, convinced that love could conquer anything. But now, with Daniel and his uncle in custody, every memory feels tainted, every sweet moment shadowed by doubt. And here's the question that's keeping everyone up at night. What did Lisa find that turned her world upside down? What secret was so explosive, so undeniable, that it led to police, handcuffs, and a love story shattered in public? The answer is out there, buried in messages, whispered in late-night phone calls, hidden in the spaces between what was said and what was meant. The truth is coming, and it's messier than anyone could have imagined. You're watching Reality Sport, and I'm Oliva. If you think you've seen drama before, buckle up, because this story is about to take you places you never expected. Hit that subscribe button, drop your wildest theory in the comments, and get ready for a ride that will have you questioning everything you thought you knew about love, trust, and reality TV. The next twist is closer than you think, and trust me, you won't want to miss a second. Before the sirens, before the headlines, before Lisa's world spun out of control, there was only hope. Lisa's first message to Daniel was a leap of faith, a swipe right that felt like destiny. Their chat started slow, but within days, the spark was undeniable. Daniel's text came with a warmth that cut through the screen, and Lisa, who'd spent years feeling invisible, suddenly felt seen. Every morning, she woke up to a good morning from Nigeria, and every night, she fell asleep to Daniel's voice, promising her a future she'd almost stopped believing in. The distance didn't matter. The time zones didn't matter. It was all butterflies and late-night laughter, the kind of connection that makes you forget the world outside your phone. Their first video call was electric. Lisa's nerves melted away as Daniel flashed that smile, the one that made her friends tease her for grinning at her phone like a teenager. He talked about his dreams, his family, his plans for a life bigger than anything he'd known. Lisa shared her own scars, her hopes, her need for something real. The chemistry was instant, and the pace picked up fast. Within weeks, they were talking about meeting in person. Within months, marriage was on the table. Friends raised eyebrows, but Lisa brushed off their doubts. When you know, right? Daniel's devotion felt like a lifeline, and Lisa clung to it with everything she had. The cultural excitement was real. Lisa dove into learning about Daniel's world, from food to music to family traditions. She practiced greetings in his language, watched Nollywood movies, and even tried to cook jollof rice, badly, but with heart. Daniel's family seemed to love her enthusiasm, especially his uncle, who always had a kind word and a gentle smile on their group calls. He called Lisa daughter from the start, and she ate it up. It felt like a blessing, a sign that this wasn't just a fling, but a real merging of families. Daniel's uncle was always there, offering advice, sharing stories, making Lisa feel like she belonged. But sometimes, his questions got a little personal. He wanted to know about Lisa's job, her savings, her plans for the future. She chalked it up to curiosity, maybe even pride. After all, who wouldn't want to know about the woman joining their family? But looking back, the red flags were there, waving quietly in the background. The marriage talk moved at lightning speed. Daniel was always eager to talk about the wedding, the house they'd buy, the life they'd build together. Lisa loved the attention, but sometimes she wondered if they were skipping steps. Money came up more than she expected. Daniel asked about her work, her retirement plans, even her credit score. He said he wanted to make sure they'd be secure, that they could build something lasting. Lisa wanted to believe it was all about love, but a tiny voice in her head started to whisper, "Is this normal?" Still, she pushed the doubts aside. Love is supposed to be a little crazy, right? Daniel's uncle became a fixture in their story. He was always on the calls, always ready with advice, always steering the conversation back to the future. Sometimes, he'd talk about the importance of family, of pooling resources, of building a legacy together. Lisa felt honored to be included, but sometimes she wondered if she was being sized up. Was this the wisdom of an elder, or was there something else going on? She wanted to trust, but the questions kept piling up, quietly, in the back of her mind. And then, one night, Lisa overheard something she was never meant to hear. A conversation between Daniel and his uncle whispered in the next room. Words that would haunt her long after the call ended. She didn't catch every detail, but what she heard was enough to make her stomach drop. Was it a misunderstanding, or was it the first crack in the perfect picture? That secret conversation would change everything, and Lisa's world would never be the same. If you think the drama has peaked, you're not even close. The real story is about to begin, and the truth is more shocking than anyone could have guessed. Lisa always thought love meant sharing everything, but she never expected everything to mean spreadsheets, wire transfers, and late-night talks about joint accounts before she'd even unpacked her suitcase. At first, the money talk felt practical, almost romantic in its own way. Daniel would say things like, "We need to plan for our future," and Lisa, swept up in the fantasy, wanted to believe it was all about building a life together. He'd ask about her savings, her plans for retirement, even her credit cards, and she'd answer, thinking this was what real couples did. But as the weeks went by, the questions got sharper, the tone more urgent. Suddenly, it wasn't just about dreaming. It was about details. How much did she have in her 401k? Did she own her house outright? Would she be willing to invest in a business with him once she moved? Lisa tried to keep up, but the pace was dizzying. Daniel's charm was relentless. He'd reassure her with sweet words, promising that everything he did was for their future. He'd send her links to properties in Nigeria, talk about opening a joint account, and even suggest they start looking at business opportunities together. "We're a team," he'd say, "and teams share everything." Lisa wanted to believe him, but every time she hesitated, Daniel would double down on the romance. He'd send her love notes, call her his queen, and remind her how lucky they were to have found each other. It was intoxicating, but also exhausting. Lisa started to feel like she was being swept along by a current she couldn't control. Meanwhile, Daniel's uncle was always in the background, his advice getting more pointed with every conversation. He'd talk about the importance of family, of building wealth together, of making sure everyone was taken care of. He'd ask Lisa about her assets, her insurance, her plans for the future. Sometimes, he'd even suggest that she transfer money ahead of her move, just to make things easier. Lisa laughed it off at first, but the requests kept coming. The uncle's tone was always polite, but there was an edge to it, a sense that this was more than just friendly advice. Lisa started to wonder if she was being tested or targeted. The more Lisa thought about it, the more uneasy she became. Was this normal? Were other couples talking about joint investments before they'd even set a wedding date? She started asking her friends, searching online, looking for reassurance. Some said it was smart to plan ahead, others warned her to be careful. Lisa's gut told her something was off, but Daniel's charm was hard to resist. Every time she tried to pull back, he'd pull her in closer, promising her the world. The tension between her heart and her instincts grew with every conversation. Then came the night that changed everything. Lisa was in the kitchen making tea when she heard Daniel and his uncle talking in the next room. Their voices were low, urgent, and she caught only fragments of the conversation. But what she heard made her blood run cold. Words like assets, secure, and before she changes her mind floated through the air, sharp as knives. Lisa froze, her mind racing. Was she imagining things? Or had she just stumbled onto something she was never supposed to hear? The questions swirled in her head, louder than ever. Was Daniel planning a future with her, or planning something else entirely? The answer was out there, waiting to be uncovered, and Lisa knew she couldn't ignore her doubts any longer. The next move would change everything, and the truth was about to come crashing in. Lisa stood in the hallway, mug of tea trembling in her hand, as the words from the next room sliced through the quiet. "Secure her assets quickly." The phrase hit her like a slap, echoing in her mind long after the voices faded. She pressed herself against the wall, heart pounding, trying to convince herself she'd misheard. But the tone was unmistakable, urgent, secretive, nothing like the warm family banter she'd grown used to. For a moment, she couldn't move. The world tilted, and all the little doubts she'd pushed aside came rushing back, sharper than ever. Every sweet message, every promise, every late-night plan for the future now felt like a setup. Lisa's trust, built over months of hope and vulnerability, shattered in an instant. She barely slept that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she replayed the conversation, searching for another explanation. Maybe it was a misunderstanding. Maybe Daniel and his uncle were talking about something else. But the more she thought about it, the more the pieces started to fit together in a way that made her stomach twist. Lisa's mind raced through every conversation about money. Every time Daniel had pressed her for details, every time his uncle had nudged her toward sharing more. She remembered the way Daniel's eyes would flick to his uncle during those talks, the way the uncle's questions always circled back to her finances. It all felt different now. Colder, calculated. By morning, Lisa knew she couldn't ignore it any longer. She started digging, scrolling back through months of messages, rereading every chat, every email, every bank statement she'd shared. She looked for patterns, for anything that might prove she was overreacting or confirm her worst fears. The more she searched, the more uneasy she became. There were messages she'd forgotten, little nudges from Daniel about transferring money, suggestions about opening joint accounts, even a few offhand comments about how things move faster in Nigeria. She found screenshots she'd saved without thinking, notes she'd jotted down after conversations that left her unsettled. Each one felt heavier now, loaded with meaning she hadn't seen before. Lisa's emotions swung wildly between anger and heartbreak. She wanted to believe Daniel loved her, that his uncle was just looking out for family. But the evidence was piling up, and it was getting harder to explain away. She started making a list, writing down every moment that felt off, every time she'd felt pressured or rushed. She saved every message, every voice note, every document Daniel had sent her about their future plans. The more she found, the more certain she became that something was wrong. Lisa's hands shook as she scrolled through her phone, her heart breaking all over again with each new discovery. But she wasn't ready to confront Daniel, not yet. She needed more. She needed proof, something undeniable, something that would make sense of the chaos in her head. Lisa started looking for patterns, for connections between Daniel's requests and his uncle's advice. She noticed how the financial talk always ramped up after a romantic gesture, how the uncle's questions always followed a promise from Daniel. It was like a dance, one she hadn't realized she was part of until now. Lisa's determination hardened. She wasn't going to let herself be played. She was going to find out the truth, no matter how much it hurt. And then, buried in a folder she'd almost forgotten, Lisa found something that made her breath catch. A document Daniel had sent her weeks ago, disguised as a business proposal, but with her name and bank details already filled in. She stared at it, her mind racing. Was this the smoking gun she'd been looking for? Was this the proof that would blow the whole case wide open? Lisa's world had already changed once, but she knew the real shock was still to come. The evidence was in her hands, and what she did next would decide everything. Lisa waited until the sun was high, nerves raw and resolve set, before she finally faced Daniel. She held her phone tight, thumb hovering over the folder of evidence she'd collected, heart pounding so hard she could barely breathe. Daniel was in the living room, scrolling through his phone, acting like nothing had changed. Lisa's voice shook as she called his name, but her eyes were steady. She laid out the messages, the business proposal, the late-night whispers she'd overheard. She asked him, point blank, why he and his uncle were talking about securing her assets quickly. The room went silent, the air thick with tension. Daniel's face shifted from confusion to shock to anger in seconds. He denied everything, his voice rising, hands gesturing wildly. He said Lisa was paranoid, that she'd misunderstood, that he would never do anything to hurt her. He insisted the financial talk was normal, that couples everywhere planned for their future, that his uncle was only trying to help. Lisa pressed harder, reading out the messages, showing him the document with her bank details. Daniel's denial only grew louder, his explanations more desperate. He accused Lisa of not trusting him, of letting her friends and the internet poison her mind. The uncle entered, drawn by the noise, and immediately took Daniel's side. He spoke calmly, but his words were sharp. He said Lisa didn't understand their culture, that in Nigeria, families talk about money, about property, about building a future together. He claimed the conversation Lisa overheard was about protecting her, not taking from her. He said she was twisting their words, making something ugly out of something innocent. Lisa felt the ground shift beneath her feet. She wanted to believe them, but the evidence in her hands told a different story. The argument spiraled, voices echoing off the walls. Lisa accused Daniel and his uncle of using her, of planning to take her money and leave her stranded. Daniel shot back, saying Lisa was ungrateful, that she'd never trusted him, that she was ruining everything. The uncle tried to play peacemaker, but his words only fanned the flames. Lisa's anger boiled over. She told them she was done, that she was keeping every message, every document, every scrap of evidence. She started taking screenshots in front of them, saving voice notes, writing down dates and times. Daniel tried to grab her phone, but Lisa pulled away, her hands shaking, but her voice steady. The collapse was total. The love story that had started with hope and laughter now lay in ruins, buried under suspicion and betrayal. Lisa locked herself in her room, backing up every file, every message, every call log. She didn't know what she was going to do next, but she knew she couldn't let this go. The fear was real now. Fear that she'd been played. Fear that she'd lose everything. Fear that nobody would believe her. But underneath the fear was something stronger. Determination. Lisa wasn't going to be a victim. She was going to fight back, no matter what it took. Outside, Daniel and his uncle argued in hushed tones, their voices tense and urgent. Lisa could hear them through the door, plotting their next move. She wondered if they were planning to run, to cover their tracks, to turn the story against her. The uncertainty gnawed at her, but she refused to back down. She started drafting a timeline, organizing her evidence, preparing herself for whatever came next. The question hung in the air, heavy and unanswered. Would Lisa go to the police? And if she did, what would happen to Daniel and his uncle? The stakes had never been higher, and the next decision would change everything. Lisa's hands shook as she walked into the police station, clutching a folder thick with screenshots, messages, and that business proposal with her name on it. The officer behind the desk listened quietly as she explained, voice trembling, how her dream romance had twisted into something she barely recognized. She laid out the evidence, every detail, every date, every suspicious conversation. The officer's face stayed neutral. But Lisa could see the shift in his eyes as he realized this wasn't just a lover's quarrel. This was something bigger, something that needed to be taken seriously. The complaint was filed, and suddenly, everything moved fast. Within hours, police arrived at Daniel's apartment. Lisa watched from a distance, heart pounding, as Daniel and his uncle were led away in handcuffs. The neighbors stared, phones out, recording every second. Daniel shouted that it was all a mistake, that Lisa was lying, that he loved her. His uncle tried to reason with the officers, insisting it was a cultural misunderstanding, but nobody was listening. The reality of the situation hit Lisa like a wave. This was no longer about heartbreak or betrayal. This was about the law, about consequences, about the truth coming out whether anyone was ready or not. Back at the production office, panic spread like wildfire. The show's producers scrambled to review hours of footage, searching for anything that might explain what had happened or anything that might get them in trouble. Legal teams pored over contracts, worried about liability, about what they'd missed, about what might air and what needed to be buried. Editors worked overtime, scrubbing through scenes, flagging every moment where money, property, or family advice came up. The drama that had once been ratings gold now looked like a legal minefield. Nobody wanted to be the one who let a real-life crime slip through the cracks. Meanwhile, social media exploded. Fans who had shipped Lisa and Daniel from the start now split into warring camps. Some called Lisa a hero for standing up for herself, for refusing to be played. Others accused her of overreacting, of misunderstanding cultural differences, of ruining a man's life over a few suspicious messages. Hashtags trended, memes flew, and every new rumor sent the internet into a fresh frenzy. People dissected every episode, every Instagram post, every offhand comment, searching for clues they'd missed. Was Daniel a master manipulator, or was Lisa seeing shadows where there were none? The debate raged, louder and uglier with every passing hour. But behind the noise, the real story was just beginning. The police started their investigation, digging into Lisa's evidence, interviewing Daniel and his uncle, reviewing every message, every call, every financial document. The stakes were higher than ever, and the truth was about to come out. What would the investigation uncover? Was this a tragic misunderstanding, or was there something far more sinister hiding in plain sight? The answers were coming, and nobody was ready for what they would reveal. Investigators wasted no time. They started with Lisa's phone, scrolling through endless threads of messages, voice notes, and call logs. Every emoji, every I love you, every question about money was cataloged and cross-checked. They looked for patterns, for the moment when sweet talk turned strategic, for the shift from romance to business. Lisa sat across from them, reliving every conversation, her nerves raw as she tried to remember if she'd missed anything important. The officers asked about the first time Daniel mentioned money, about the uncle's role, about the business proposal with her name already filled in. Lisa answered everything, her voice steady even as her hands shook. The investigation turned to Daniel and his uncle. Both insisted they were innocent, that Lisa had misunderstood their intentions. Daniel said he loved Lisa, that he only wanted to build a future together. He explained that in his culture, families talk openly about money, about property, about planning for the future. His uncle echoed him, saying it was normal for elders to guide young couples to make sure everyone was protected. They claimed the talk about securing assets was about making Lisa feel safe, not about taking anything from her. The officers listened, but their faces gave nothing away. The timing of the financial conversations became the focus. Investigators mapped out when Daniel first brought up joint accounts, when the uncle started asking about Lisa's savings, when the business proposal appeared. They compared these dates to the timeline of the relationship, before or after the engagement, before or after Lisa booked her flight, before or after she started sending money for future plans. The closer they looked, the more complicated it got. Some messages sounded innocent on their own, but together they painted a picture that was hard to ignore. Lisa's receipts were damning. She had screenshots of Daniel asking for her bank details, of the uncle suggesting she transfer money before moving, of conversations that always seemed to circle back to finances. She had the business proposal, the one with her name and account number already typed in, sent weeks before any wedding date was set. She had voice notes where Daniel promised her the world, then pivoted to talk about investments and property. The evidence was there, but was it enough to prove intent? Or could it all be explained away as cultural differences, as a couple planning for their future in a way that looked suspicious only in hindsight? Daniel and his uncle stuck to their story. They said Lisa was reading too much into things, that she was scared because she didn't understand how families work in Nigeria. They said the proposal was a gesture of trust, not a scheme. They pointed out that Lisa had never actually sent any large sums, that everything was still in the planning stage. The investigators pressed them, asking why the conversations always seemed to happen after romantic gestures, why the uncle was so involved, why the urgency to secure assets quickly. Daniel's answers grew more defensive, the uncle's tone more frustrated. The investigation dragged on, every new detail raising more questions than answers. Was this a love story gone wrong? Or a carefully planned setup from the start? Did Daniel and his uncle cross a line? Or did Lisa's fears turn normal planning into a nightmare? The evidence was strong, but the motives were murky. The authorities had to decide, was there enough proof to move forward? Or was this all a tragic misunderstanding fueled by culture shock and broken trust? The answer was coming, but nobody knew which way it would fall. Lisa barely recognized herself in the mirror anymore. The woman who had landed in Nigeria full of hope and excitement now looked hollowed out, her eyes rimmed with exhaustion, her smile gone. Every day felt like walking through a storm. She couldn't step outside without feeling the weight of stares, whispers, and judgment. The neighbors who once greeted her with warmth now watched her with suspicion, as if she were the one who'd brought shame to their doorstep. Even the production crew, who had once cheered her on, kept their distance, their cameras lowered, their faces tight with worry. Lisa felt utterly alone, stranded in a place that no longer felt like a second home. Nights were the worst. She'd lie awake, replaying every moment with Daniel, every conversation with his uncle, every time she'd ignored her gut. The trust she'd built, brick by brick, had crumbled overnight. She questioned everything, her choices, her instincts, her ability to tell love from manipulation. The messages from friends back home were a lifeline, but even their support couldn't fill the emptiness. Lisa wondered if she'd ever feel safe again, if she'd ever be able to trust anyone, even herself. The pressure became unbearable. The investigation dragged on, the questions never stopped, and Lisa's nerves frayed with every passing day. She started to realize that staying in Nigeria was only making things worse. The memories were too raw, the wounds too fresh. She needed space, distance, a chance to breathe. The decision to leave wasn't easy, but it felt like the only way to survive. Lisa packed her bags in silence, her hands shaking as she folded the clothes she'd once worn with so much hope. She left a note for Daniel, not out of forgiveness, but because she needed closure. The goodbye was quiet, heavy with everything left unsaid. The flight home felt endless. Lisa stared out the window, watching the world blur by, her mind racing with questions that had no answers. She landed in the U.S. to a different kind of scrutiny. Reporters, fans, and strangers all wanting her side of the story. But Lisa wasn't ready to talk. She needed time to heal, to process, to figure out who she was without Daniel, without the show, without the dream that had turned into a nightmare. Back in Nigeria, Daniel's world was falling apart. His reputation, once spotless, was now stained by suspicion and scandal. Friends distanced themselves, business partners hesitated, and even his own family started to question what had really happened. The uncle, who had always been the respected elder, now faced whispers and side glances wherever he went. The community wanted answers, but all they got were denials and half-truths. The damage was done, and there was no easy way to fix it. Yet, even as the dust settled, the biggest question refused to go away. Was Lisa the victim of a carefully planned scam, or had she misunderstood a culture and a family trying to welcome her in their own way? Was Daniel a manipulator, or a man caught in a storm he never saw coming? The truth was tangled, messy, and heartbreakingly unclear. The world watched, waiting for answers, but for Lisa and Daniel, closure felt further away than ever. Lisa's first days back in the U.S. felt like waking up from a nightmare she couldn't shake. The familiar sights of her hometown should have brought comfort, but instead, they felt foreign, as if she'd returned from a war no one else could see. She kept her phone on silent, ignoring the flood of notifications, the endless requests for interviews, the messages from strangers who thought they knew her story. Even her closest friends struggled to find the right words. Some hugged her tight, whispering that she was brave, that she'd done the right thing. Others tiptoed around the subject, afraid to ask what had really happened, afraid to hear the pain in her voice. Lisa tried to settle back into her old routines, but nothing felt the same. She'd walk through the grocery store and catch herself scanning faces, half expecting to see Daniel or his uncle around every corner. She jumped at every unknown number, every knock at the door. Sleep was a luxury she rarely enjoyed. Nightmares replayed the worst moments, Daniel's denials, the uncle's cold explanations, the police arriving, the look on Daniel's face as he was led away. Some mornings, she woke up convinced it had all been a bad dream, only to find the evidence folder still on her nightstand, a silent reminder that the past was never far behind. Her friends rallied around her, refusing to let her disappear into her own grief. They brought over food, dragged her out for walks, sat with her in silence when words failed. One friend, a therapist, gently suggested Lisa talk to someone professional. At first, Lisa resisted. She didn't want to relive the story, didn't want to admit how much it had broken her. But the nightmares didn't stop, and the anxiety only grew. Eventually, she agreed, sitting across from a stranger in a quiet office, telling her story piece by piece. The therapist listened without judgment, helping Lisa untangle the guilt, the anger, the shame. Slowly, Lisa started to see that healing wasn't about forgetting, but about learning to live with the scars. Trust was the hardest thing to rebuild. Lisa found herself questioning everyone's motives, second-guessing every compliment, every offer of help. She deleted dating apps, avoided social gatherings, and kept her circle small. But over time, with patience and support, she started to let people in again. She learned to set boundaries, to listen to her instincts, to forgive herself for believing in something that wasn't real. The process was slow, full of setbacks and small victories, but Lisa refused to let the past define her. She was determined to move forward, even if the path was uncertain. While Lisa tried to piece her life back together, Daniel was fighting his own battle. From the moment news broke of his arrest, his world turned upside down. Friends who once called him brother now kept their distance, afraid of being caught in the fallout. Business partners pulled out of deals, worried about the stain on his reputation. Even his family, once united, started to fracture under the pressure. Daniel took to social media, posting long statements insisting on his innocence. He claimed Lisa had misunderstood everything, that he'd never tried to scam her, that the financial talks were normal for couples planning a future together. He posted photos of happier times, screenshots of messages he said proved his side, and videos where he pleaded for understanding. The internet, predictably, split down the middle. Some fans believed Daniel, convinced Lisa had overreacted or let her fears get the best of her. They pointed to cultural differences, to the pressures of reality TV, to the way editing could twist a story. Others stood firmly with Lisa, praising her for speaking up, for refusing to be taken advantage of, for trusting her gut when everything felt wrong. The argument spilled into comment sections, fan forums, and even mainstream news. Every new detail, every rumor, every leaked message sent the debate into overdrive. Was Daniel a victim of misunderstanding? Or a master manipulator who'd finally been caught? Was Lisa a hero? Or someone who'd let paranoia destroy a good man's life? Reality TV producers watched the chaos unfold with a mix of dread and fascination. Behind the scenes, questions swirled about what the crew had seen, what they'd filmed, and what they'd chosen to leave on the cutting room floor. Some insiders whispered that producers had noticed the financial talk early on, that they'd flagged it as a possible storyline, but never imagined it would explode into a legal scandal. Others claimed the crew had missed the warning signs, too focused on the romance to see the cracks forming underneath. Legal teams reviewed footage, worried about liability, about what might air and what needed to be buried. The show's reputation was on the line, and everyone wanted to know, what did the producers know, and when did they know it? Lisa's story became a cautionary tale, a case study in how reality TV can amplify drama, blur the lines between truth and fiction, and leave real people picking up the pieces. Fans dissected every episode, searching for clues, for moments when the truth might have slipped through. Some blamed the producers for pushing the couple too hard, for encouraging drama at the expense of real emotions. Others argued that Lisa and Daniel had made their own choices, that the cameras only captured what was already there. The debate raged on, with no easy answers. Through it all, Lisa kept her distance from the spotlight. She turned down interview requests, ignored the tabloids, and focused on her own healing. But the questions never stopped. Would she ever get closure? Would Daniel ever clear his name? The story refused to fade, living on in reruns, in online debates, in the memories of everyone who'd watched it unfold. For Lisa, closure wasn't about a verdict or a headline. It was about finding peace, about learning to trust herself again, about believing that the future could still hold something good. For Daniel, redemption meant proving his innocence, rebuilding his life, and convincing the world that he was more than the worst thing he'd ever been accused of. The aftershocks of their story rippled out, touching everyone who'd watched, everyone who'd believed, everyone who'd wondered if they could ever trust again. The answers were still out there, waiting to be found. But for now, the questions lingered, haunting the edges of every new beginning. No matter how many times Lisa replayed the story in her mind, the ending never felt clean. She could scroll through every message, relive every conversation, and still find herself stuck on the same question. Was it all a lie? Or did she destroy something real by doubting too soon? Daniel's words echoed in her memory, sometimes sounding like love, sometimes like a script. The uncle's advice, once comforting, now felt like a warning she'd missed. Even the smallest details, an awkward pause, a question about her savings, a look exchanged across the dinner table, took on new meaning in the harsh light of hindsight. Lisa wanted to believe she'd done the right thing, that she'd protected herself from a trap, but the doubt never fully left her. It crept in late at night, whispering that maybe, just maybe, she'd misunderstood everything. Daniel's side of the story was just as tangled. He told anyone who would listen that he'd loved Lisa, that he'd only wanted to build a future together. He insisted the financial talks were normal, that his uncle's involvement was about tradition, not manipulation. He pointed to the messages where Lisa had agreed, the plans they'd made together, the dreams they'd shared. But even Daniel couldn't deny that things had moved fast, that money had become a constant topic, that the pressure had sometimes felt like a test. He wondered if he'd pushed too hard, if he'd let his uncle's advice cloud his own judgment. He wondered if he'd ever be able to prove his innocence, or if the shadow of suspicion would follow him forever. The truth, as always, lived somewhere in the middle. International relationships are built on hope, but also on risk. When two people from different worlds try to build a life together, every difference, cultural, financial, emotional, becomes a potential fault line. Trust is the foundation, but it's also the most fragile thing of all. Once it cracks, every memory gets re-examined, every promise sounds rehearsed, every gesture feels loaded. Lisa and Daniel's story was supposed to be about love conquering distance, but it became a lesson in how quickly trust can collapse when doubt creeps in. Looking back, the clues were always there, hiding in plain sight. The whirlwind romance, the fast-tracked marriage talk, the uncle's constant presence, the early questions about money. Lisa's friends had warned her to slow down, to ask more questions, to protect herself. Daniel's family had pushed him to secure his future, to think about what he was building, to make sure he wasn't left with nothing. Both sides thought they were doing the right thing, but neither saw how their actions would collide. The business proposal with Lisa's name already filled in, the late-night conversation about securing assets, the sudden urgency to combine finances, each moment seemed innocent on its own. But together, they told a story that was impossible to ignore. The cost of broken trust is measured in more than heartbreak. Lisa lost her sense of safety, her confidence, her belief that love could be simple. Daniel lost his reputation, his relationships, his chance at a new life. Both were left with scars that would take years to heal. Their story became a warning for anyone thinking about crossing borders for love. Ask questions, trust your instincts, and never ignore the little voice that says something isn't right. But it was also a reminder that sometimes the real tragedy isn't in being deceived, but in never knowing for sure. Fans still argue about what really happened. Some say Lisa saved herself from disaster. Others say she let fear ruin something beautiful. Some blame Daniel for pushing too hard. Others blame Lisa for not understanding his world. The debate plays out in comment sections, in group chats, in late-night conversations between friends who wonder if they'd have seen the signs. The producers, for their part, keep quiet, letting the footage speak for itself, knowing that reality TV is never as simple as it looks. As the credits roll on Lisa and Daniel's story, the questions linger. Will Lisa ever find closure, or will she always wonder what might have been? Will Daniel ever clear his name, or will the shadow of suspicion follow him wherever he goes? The answers may never come, but the lessons remain. Love is risky, trust is precious, and sometimes the hardest part is living with the questions that never get answered. If you thought this story was wild, wait until you hear what happened with another 90-day fiancé couple. One where the secrets run even deeper, and the fallout is even more explosive. You won't believe how far some people will go for love, or what they're willing to risk when the cameras are rolling. Stick around, because the next scandal is about to make this one look tame.